Trump and Epstein, it's a big thing happening right now. And we're probably never going to get those Epstein lists because Trump's on those lists. But did you know in history, there has been multiple times where a leader of a nation has been caught in a pedophilia ring? And one of those we're going to go over today. And that is Louis the 15th of France. This is the Continuum. Louis the 15th of France, a monarch once adored, celebrated as Louis the Well Beloved. Yet by the time of his death, the name was an empty echo, replaced by scorn. At the heart of his fall was a scandal that Versailles tried to keep hidden, a modest house that had become infamous, known as the Paquet Surf, or Deer Park. It was there, behind closed doors, that the king's private desires festered into a public disgrace. Louis XV was not born to scandal. When he came to the throne as a boy in 1715, France saw him as a gift. The weary kingdom, battered by wars and taxes under Louis XIV, looked upon the young king with hope. But Louis XV's reign was long, and time eroded affection. By the 1740s, France had endured costly wars. The 7 Year Wars in particular brought defeat, humiliation, and staggering debt. The nation hungered for stability, but their king hungered for something else. At Versailles, Louis XV surrounded himself with mistresses. First, Madame de Pompadour, who was brilliant and influential, though the relationship became more companion than romantic. Later, others came and went, but Louis craved discretion, a place away from the court's constant eyes and rivalries. Thus was born Deer Park. The Deer Park was not grand. To any passerby, it looked like an ordinary home in Versailles, but in ordinariness was its strength. Agents of the crown operated under strict secrecy, sought out young women in Paris. Some were enticed by money, others were promised advancements. Their families were often poor, eager to see their daughters married or provided for. The girls were brought quietly to Deer Park, where they lived under supervision. They were clothed, fed, and educated in refinement, but their role was singular, to please the king. Once dismissed, they were often married off with generous dowries, their silence purchased, their names forgotten. It was a system, organized, managed, and hidden in plain sight. Versailles was a palace of mirrors, but also of whispers. The Deer Park could not remain hidden forever. Courtiers noticed the comings and goings. Servants talked. Stories spread that the king had kept a secret harem, that the girls were shockingly young, that their innocence was bought and discarded like coin. At first, it was whispers with amusement. The king was, after all, a man, but amusement turned into disapproval. By the 1750s, disapproval hardened into outrage. The Deer Park became a byword for royal excess. In Enlightenment Paris, gossip didn't just stay confined to Versailles. It traveled down the Seine, into the coffee houses, onto the presses. Pamphlets, the underground literature of the 18th century, seized upon Deer Park. It portrayed Louis XV not as the father of the nation, but as an aging libertine. Some pamphlets described Deer Park as a royal brothel, where young girls were trapped in decadence. Others mocked the king's fertility, portraying him as grotesque and insatiable. Whether the details are true or not mattered little. The idea was profound enough. In Enlightenment age, when philosophers like Voltaire were already dismantling divine monarchy with their pens, the Deer Park was their proof. Here was a king, chosen by God, who squandered his sacred role on base pleasures. Deer Park was not just a scandal of morality, it was a scandal of legitimacy. Kings of France had long relied on the image of parental virtue. The king was the father of his people, guardian of justice, shepherd of the nation. But Louis XV had broke that image. Now he was mocked, ridiculed, and stripped of majesty. Deer Park was more than a rumor, it was a weapon. It catalyzed what people already feared, that the monarchy had become corrupt, selfish, and detached. It turned relevance into ridicule. And once ridicule turned to root, monarchy could not survive. By the 1760s, the Deer Park faded, but its shadow loomed. Louis XV's final mistress, Madame du Barry, became the lightning rod for public hatred. Aristocrats despised her for her common birth, while pamphleteers mocked her as the new face of royal corruption. When Louis XV died in 1774, his funeral procession was met not with mourning, but with jeers. People celebrated his passing. The well beloved had died, the unloved. The Deer Park did not die with the king. In the years leading to the revolution, the scandal was revived again and again. Revolutionary pamphleteers connected Louis XV's Deer Park to the perceived decadence of Marie Antoinette, whom they accused of her own immoral liaisons. The monarchy itself was painted as a deer park, greedy, corrupt, indulgent, and useless. By 1789, when revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, the memory of Louis XV's scandal lingered. It had weakened the aura of monarchy, turning kings into men, and men into targets. Louis XV once inspired admiration, but the Deer Park turned affection into contempt. What was meant as a private escape became a public scandal. What was hidden in the shadows cast a light so bright it blinded a dynasty. The Deer Park was more than a house, it was a symbol of a monarchy that had lost its dignity, its morality, and ultimately its throne. So here it is. Nowadays, we see that Donald Trump and Epstein had a huge effect on what will end up being his legacy if he even has one. Louis XV, who was once admired that he was going to change a nation, just made it deeply more in debt. Same we see with Donald Trump. And we see that Louis XV liked dealing with younger women, just like Donald Trump said he likes them on the younger side. We see that his Epstein scandal could easily be the reason that's going to take down him. But here's the thing, Louis XV died before he ever had any sort of judgment for this. But his predecessors had to deal with this scandal for years, decades. We see that Marie Antoinette was judged just because of Louis XV's scandal with younger women. Now, she wasn't a great person. She had the immoral liaisons that we see that Louis XV had. But Donald Trump will probably end up dying. That's going to happen. But will his dealings with the younger age women that he dealt with Epstein have a longing shadow like we saw back in France? This is the greed, corruption, indulgence, and uselessness that the monarchy faced back in 1789 in France that we're seeing now with Trump. But what will happen? Ultimately, in France, it led to a revolution. Will that happen here? I plan on doing a further deep dive, but this is a short episode of the Continuum.